Okay, thank you very much, Jen, and welcome everybody. Glad to see there's some interest in growing wildflowers from seed, and I'm going to focus on California native wildflowers, and particularly California native wildflowers that grow in the Northern California area, the Bay Area, where we are. And I thought a good place to start might be just to go through some inspiring pictures of what some of the wildflowers look like up close. Of course, they're not really this big when you look at them in nature, but this gives you an idea of what we're shooting for. Everybody's familiar, I hope, with the California poppy. It grows throughout the state, but the version of the poppy that it is native to the Bay Area is called the coastal form of the poppy, and it's a perennial. So the plant can lay down a big fleshy taproot and come back year after year. And if it's the real archetypical coastal form, it'll be a more yellow-orange color than even this one is. The great big annual poppy that you see is really native down in Antelope Valley in Southern California, but has been spread widely by scattering the seeds. And in the old days, gas companies gave away California poppies as favors at the gas station, and I even heard that at some point in time, they broadcast California poppy seeds throughout the Midwest with airplanes. So they've gotten around. One of the really pretty flowers that you see all the time out in the foothills is the California buttercup, a type of ranunculus. And they pop up. They're usually one of the first wildflowers to be seen, and should be out very shortly now with all the rain we've had. This is sky lupine, which is one of the smaller lupines, but one that grows very profusely, and again, out in the grassy fields, and sometimes in light shade, it'll come up as well. The California poppy needs to be out in full sun, but the lupine can have light shade, but is more often out in the open. The purple Chinese houses, I think they're so called because of the kind of layered pagoda-like look, can grow in either full sun or in part shade. They're an annual and they grow very readily. Clarkia amina is known as farewell to spring because it blooms at the end of spring. And when you see this blooming, you know that summer is right around the corner. It must sense when the soil is starting to dry out and says, this is the time for me to bloom. And its cousin, Clarkia consina, red ribbons, grows very well in shade. And is a very pretty kind of delicate woodland looking flower. Red maids are a type of succulent. Calandrinias, there are many types of calandrinias, but this is a local native one. And this can take very hot, dry areas and does well in pots as well. And one of my favorites, baby blue eyes. Just a gorgeous little flower, again, full sun or part shade. And cream cups do well in a soggy area. If you've got a spot where the water ponds, cream cups will be very happy there because they don't mind having wet feet. And then 5-spot is a relative of baby blue eyes and quite stunning. With its 5 little spots, one at the end of each of the petals on the flower. Now, why do we focus on native wildflowers? The idea here is to increase biodiversity, and you might say to yourself, well, any plant I plant is going to be diverse. It's going to be different than another plant that I plant. But what we really mean is biodiversity in a bigger picture, not just the plants, but the insects, the fungi, the birds that are connected with them. And native wildflowers do a much better job of increasing overall biodiversity than any of the introduced plants can. The plants, after all, are the foundation of the food chain. Only plants can take energy from the sun and turn it into sugars and proteins and things that other animals, insects, birds can eat and turn into meat. Insects are the first step in that. They eat the plants directly, and they in turn are eaten by other insects and by birds and by some mammals even. As you might know, if you've had raccoons digging up your lawn looking for the grubs that are insect larvae. And it turns out Doug Ptolemy's research has told us that birds actually require many, many insect larvae to feed their young in the spring. And the only way that you're going to get those insect larvae is to give the insects something to eat, because the larvae do most of the eating of the plants. And so in a sense, we are turning over a new paradigm, which is not eek, something is eating my plants, but wow, something's eating my plants. I'm doing something right here. Because if something's eating my plants, sharing a little bit of it, then something else is going to eat whatever's eating the plants. The native birds and insects co-evolve with these plants. They recognize them. Their DNA is imprinted to have them close to these plants, to bury themselves in the ground at certain points in their life cycles next to these plants. And it's real important that we all pitch in and increase the number of native plants that are available for the rest of the wildlife around us. Now, these are some resources that I find really useful, and you might want to take a screenshot or a picture of this page. Larner's Seeds over in Bolinas is a wonderful place to get native flower seeds, grass seeds, and they have a wonderful website. You should check it out. If you want to know what natives grow in your neighborhood, your zip code, your city by name, your county, go to calscape.org. A fantastic resource that unfortunately not every state has, but California has it. And you can put in your zip code and it'll give you a list of all of the plants that are native in your area. And if you're growing wildflowers from seed, you're going to want to stick with the annuals and the perennials, but it's a wonderful resource. I use an app called North California Wildflowers. I think that's, maybe it says Northern California Wildflowers, but it's quite useful for figuring out if a particular plant is native in the vicinity, but also for identifying plants if you run across one. It's a good start. And the app called Picture This is sort of like Shazam for plants. You take a picture of the flower or the plant, and it shoots it off into the internet and comes back probably with, by picture matching, comes back with an idea of what the plant is. And though it's not perfect, it can often get you at least to the general vicinity of what the plant is and help you to figure it out. Jen and I got to host Doug Ptolemy in a webinar, and he has co-established the homegrown national park.org. I noticed on the outline of the webinar that this kind of got conflated with the picture of this app, but Homegrown National Park is a different spot, and the goal of the Homegrown National Park is to have us all participate by using a little part of our property or our deck or our balcony to grow some native plants and become part of the overall Homegrown National Park, and it's worth taking a look at. And then, of course, sloatgardens.com has a ton of information. Go to the Learn tab there, and you can find all kinds of resources. We're going to go through a couple of ways of germinating seeds. They're not the only ways to do it. They're just a couple of ways that work real well. And I use a few things all the time. Obviously, the seeds, some kind of seed starting medium. Often that will be a potting soil, or it can be a little peat pot or a little plug that swells up when you get it wet. I use small pots to put it in, often need some water, and I like to have a spot indoors to get things started while it's still weather that's unpredictable like this. So a windowsill with some sunlight, or get a little grow light. They're real reasonable and don't take up much space, and they do a great job these days. They're LEDs. They take almost no energy. We'll do a little botany lesson here so that we understand what a seed is, because after all, most plants do grow from seeds, and they are in fact baby plants. Think of them as the chicken egg that's been fertilized, and the baby chicken is in there ready to peck its way out. And there's really a little baby plant in out. If we provide the moisture and the temperature and the light that it needs, it's going to respond. And it sends out usually first the root, called a radicle, and then little starter leaves that usually look different than the mature leaves, and they're called cotyledons. And they store a lot of food for the plant, so that it can grow the root and grow a stem and start on some leaves before it's able to make food from the sun with the chlorophyll, which is the green stuff in the leaves. Usually the roots sprout out first, and often, especially with the native plants, they'll go way down into the ground before the leaves ever appear, because we are in a dry summer climate. Most of them sprout fall through spring, and they want to get down there deep where there might be some water in the summer, which they'll need as the soil dries out. I like to use this example of bean sprouts. This is a simple technique where you take your seeds and you put it between two paper towels and spritz it with some water and stick it in a Ziploc bag. And then I usually put it on top of the refrigerator where it's a little warmer than the rest of the house. And within a few days, almost any seed will sprout in that circumstance. It's also useful for vegetable seeds, especially things like peppers and tomatoes that you want to get started early. But I'm going to give you the example with beans here. These are scarlet runner bean seeds, which if you let the scarlet runner beans mature, this is what the beans look like, a dried bean. And you can see them sitting on a paper towel, and you fold it over and it's nice and wet. And you put it in the bag, and then you mark it with the date and what it is, so that, because these are pretty obvious as to their identity, but lots of seeds aren't. You leave about an inch open so that air can come in and out, and you stick them on the refrigerator. And within a few days, a root starts to come out of some of them. Here's two of them that are starting to sprout. And a couple of days later, you've got substantial roots coming out of them, and they're even starting to branch out. The roots are making little side roots. And you'll see just roots so far, no green stuff. And a couple days later, you've got well-branched roots, and you've got the beginning of a stem coming up with the first bean leaves at the end of the stem. Beans aren't quite like a lot of other seeds because the cotyledons are actually in the bean part here, storing a ton of energy, and that's why they're good for us to eat. They store up a lot of protein, sugar, starch that gives the plant a good start, and they're good food for us as well. As it grows along, the stem elongates, the leaves start to expand, and pretty soon you've got some great big bean leaves that are able to gather up sunlight and make food for the plant, and the cotyledons will shrivel up and disappear. Now, this technique doesn't work very well for tiny seeds because the roots tend to get tangled up in the paper towel. So it's better for seeds that are maybe at least 1/8 of an inch in diameter, nothing teeny tiny. For the tiny seeds, something like this Jiffy greenhouse kit works really well. There are lots of ways to do this, but this is one way. This kit contains that black plastic tray, which will hold water, a dome made of plastic, which will keep the humidity in but allow light in, and then these little peat pots, which when we add a little water to them like this, they will float around a little bit, and then they'll slowly absorb the water and turn themselves into little sacks of peat, which we can use as little pots. It takes about 20 minutes to absorb the water. I made myself a little pokey stick here. You could use a pencil to pull this webbing away from the top and scratch up the surface a little bit so there is more surface area for the seeds to come in contact with. And so I have 10 little or 12 little bags here waiting for some seeds. So I picked this California color flower mix from Botanical Interests. It's a nice big packet. You can see it's $6.29 is the price on it. It's because this is a lot of seeds, and if they make a smaller packet, that might be plenty for you. Probably be about half the price. On the back of it, it shows you what plants are in there, what seeds are in there, and what percentage. So for instance, the Arroyo lupine is 18% of the package by weight. That's partly because they're bigger seeds. But here's the 5 spot that we saw, and baby blue eyes, and Chinese houses, and California poppies, and Clarkia, various Clarkias. So that'll give you an idea of what you might expect to come out. The penstemon down here is only 1%, so you might not actually see a penstemon coming out of this mix. This is what the seeds look like when you shake them out of the packet. And you can see they're different size. This is probably a lupin seed here, these big round ones. These kind of arrow-shaped ones are interesting. I'm not sure. They might be tidy tips. They're clearly from the daisy family, if you will. They're a composite seed, and I'm not sure exactly what they are. This is just a bigger picture of the seeds. This is all the seeds in the packet spread out. The little tiny ones like this are probably the poppy seeds. They're small like the poppies on your bagel. So I just took a pinch, fingerful, and put the pinch on each pot, sort of patted it down to make sure that they were making good contact with this soil mix. Put the top on, made a label for it, Botanical Interest, California color. This was back in October of 22. The 21 is the day, the year. So 10/21/22. And kaboom, within a few days, things were starting to sprout. little tiny native wildflowers coming up. I set this, by the way, on top of the refrigerator, just like I do the plastic bag, because again, it's a little warmer up on the refrigerator than the rest of the house. 5 days later, they're growing and I've moved them outside. I take the top off when I move them outside, because if they get any direct sun with the top on them, they'll get too hot. So this is a way of getting them used to going outside. I don't put them in full sun initially, put them in a little bit of sun, and then move them slowly into full sun over the course of several days. That hardens them off. And then they get to the point where they really have to do something other than just grow in the little peat pot. The advantage of a peat pot is that the roots will grow right through it, and you can either put them in the ground or put them in a little bigger pot. In this case, I'm putting them in a bigger pot because I want them to get a little bigger before I set them out in the ground. And I'm going to put them in a pot that the roots can also grow through. This is a coconut coir pot. So this one's peat, this one's coconut coir, and this is just potting soil, a good quality potting soil like the Sloat organic potting in the peat pot or the coir pot. And I take the wrapper off and set the little pot right on top of the potting soil and fill it up with potting soil around it and set it in a dish of water. I like to let them absorb the water from the bottom, maybe water a little bit up top, but it's real easy to knock the plants over and to wash them out of the pot if you pour a bunch of water into the top of the pot. So the potting soil and the pot will both absorb water from the bottom, and it's a very gentle way to water them. And here they are. I did a number of them, and they're look like tiny, tiny little plants, which is what they are. I ran out of the round pots, and so these are what are called cow pots. They're made of cow manure. I think most of the Sloat stores carry them. I like the idea of repurposing the cow manure into pots that, again, the roots can grow through and that you can plant right in the ground and they'll decompose in the ground. There's no odor, they're sterilized and all of that stuff. So they're just kind of an interesting way to go about reprocessing the cow manure. So here they are growing away. And I put a label in, and I'm going to come back to those as they grow. Now, this packet I used to sow directly into the ground, and it's not because these seeds are better for that, but just that it was a different mix, and I wanted to try something different.
Dan, I have a quick question.
Larner. Yeah.
How much time for that last one? How much time from when you put the seeds in the peat pellets to the sprouts that we're seeing in the last slide, would you say?
Not more. It's pretty quick. Yeah. Not more than about 10 days.
10 days. Okay. Very cool.
Yeah, at most. Yeah. So this mix is one that the Xerxes Society put together with Larner's. Xerxes Society is a nonprofit that supports butterflies, especially monarchs. And this is a mix designed to feed insects, and particularly butterflies and moths. It has some of the same seeds we saw in the other mix. And this picture is hard to figure out unless I explain it, so I'm explaining it. This is a 5-gallon bucket, white bucket, with a little bit of compost in the bottom, and I just threw the packet of the seeds from the packet in there, and then I mixed them up with the compost, and so that I could throw out a handful of compost and seeds together rather than just the whole handful of seeds all in one throw. It's just a way of diluting seeds a bit with the compost so that you can spread them a little more even thinly. And
Oh, he froze there for a second. Dan, I don't know if you can still hear me.
I can hear you.
Oh, good. There you're back. Okay.
Okay, sorry. This is about a 2 by 2 foot patch of ground that I just scratched up with a hand hoe and took the weeds out, and it's moist. It was about a week after some rain back in November, and
Oh, we keep losing you. It's the sound. I think everybody's getting, oh, now you're back. Okay.
oh, do I keep cutting out?
A little bit. It's just the last 2 times.
Okay.
Hmm.
I feel like if I talk slower, that won't happen, but I don't think that has anything to do with it. So I'm not sure what we missed, but a critical step is to press the seeds into the soil. And I just do that with my foot or with the back of the hoe and make sure that they make real good contact with the soil. And come back to that spot and see what they're doing in a little while. Meantime, here's the first root growing through the cow pot. And you can see that they don't have any trouble getting through it. Here are the plants getting a little bigger. Plants in the coir pot getting bigger, they're all the same age, obviously. And here's a root coming through the coir pot. Now, I don't want to disturb the root, so I'm going to step it up again. I'm going to plant the coir pot into this 1 gallon nursery container. Same technique, put some potting soil in, put the coir pot on top of the potting soil, fill it up with potting soil, and I've got a plant in a gallon can. And we're going to come back and look at those as they grow. Now, I think my outline says native grasses are wildflowers too, exclamation point. And it's true. There are many, many insects and birds that require California grasses as part of their food sources, and they're useful for nest building. They're useful for hiding for smaller animals, all kinds of great things about native grasses. Most of them are what we call bunch grasses. They're not turf grasses like Kentucky bluegrass that spreads out nice and flat. They grow in a clump and they have incredibly deep roots, and it will stay green well into the summer. And then if it's a dry year, they'll turn brown at the end of the summer. This is purple needlegrass, which is our California state grass. Bet you all knew that already. And this is one growing out on the hillside in the open space. And again, this is in the fall. Really only one little rain has come, but you can see it's green. These brown things up here are the flower stems from last year. This is deer grass, which is a big grass. It'll get waist high on most of us. And it's called deer grass, not because deer eat it, but because they will lay around in it because it camouflages them. Now this is California fescue, which is another wonderful bunch grass. Now these are greener because they're growing in my garden and they get some water. Now we're back to the outdoor sowing, and I'm going to expand this a little bit if I can. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. There we go. But we can see some little guys here from the mix out here in this kind of semi-shady spot. You can see there are a lot of oak twigs, some oak leaves. One of the challenges of growing things in the ground outside is that stuff falls on it. Birds scratch it up, birds eat the seeds. There are lots of challenges, and one of the reasons I like to grow them up to a certain size and then set them outside is that, you know, they're just bigger and stronger and more ready to take on whatever challenges come along. This is the other area that I planted with that Xerxes mix, and it's out in more sun, and you can see it's growing a little more vigorously. These great big round cotyledon leaves here are from the lupines. The lupin leaves are going to grow up out of the center of that, and they are kind of 5-fingered looking leaves that I probably have a picture of as we go along here, but they're doing pretty well. Here they are just a couple days ago, that same spot, and these are the lupin leaves, more than 5 fingers. Over here you can see a California poppy growing up. Most of these are Clarkias, and they're going to make a nice little show next to this rock here out in the garden, assuming that the deer don't come along and eat them all. That is a problem. Here are 3 of the coir pots that I planted in about a 15-inch ceramic pot, and they've been doing very well. This is November 30th, and this is a couple days ago. So you can see they've been growing like weeds. But this is labeled the California Native Wildflower mix, and these are mostly Clarkia. There's a poppy lurking back here. I'm not sure what this, I'm curious to see turns out, but these have been growing really, really well. This is a poppy growing out in the wild. It happens to grow out of a bank along the road where I walk my dog a lot, and so I keep an eye on it to see what it's up to. It's a perennial form of the poppy, so it comes back year after year in the same spot. I've been watching it for several years. So take a look at the color and at the shape of the leaves, and then we're going to look at this little group. And do you see a poppy in there? I do. These are the cotyledon leaves of the poppy. They're kind of funny looking, but here are the same blue-green leaves and the branching on the leaf starting here. And this is the small version, the baby version of this. Now, native plants do get eaten by native wildlife. After all, they co-evolved together. And this is the same poppy 2 days ago. And you can see that it's been munched. Probably a deer came along and ate quite a bit of it, but it'll be back. And it'll probably still bloom this year. Now we're going to segue a little bit into milkweed, because everybody wants to grow milkweed for the monarchs, which is a wonderful thing. But there are a few things you need to know about it. First of all, it's important because it is the obligate food of the monarch caterpillar. Obligate means it's the only food they can eat. If a monarch is stupid enough to lay its eggs on an oak tree, and the eggs only eat milkweed, and milkweed has certain poisons in it that they adapt to and that are noxious to their main predator, which are birds. And so it's important that they eat milkweed to get these toxins into them. The milkweed that the nursery industry sold up until last year anyway, the most, was a tropical milkweed, this one, Asclepias curasavica. It turns out that it harbors a parasite. All of the milkweeds harbor the parasite, but the tropical one does it more because it doesn't die down in the winter. The native milkweeds go dormant at the late fall and disappear, and then they come back in the spring. The tropical milkweed keeps growing, and this protozoan parasite, which we abbreviate as OE, gets heavier and heavier load on the leaves of the tropical milkweed, and when the caterpillars eat it, they get a big load of this parasite, and it does its dirt to them during the chrysalis phase, and it makes it so their wings don't work and they ultimately die. So what we want to plant around here are the native milkweeds that have always grown here: narrow-leaf milkweed, Asclepias fascicularis, and showy milkweed, Asclepias speciosa. Asclepias californica probably grew around here too at one point, doesn't anymore, and it's very difficult to find anywhere as plants or seeds. The narrow-leaf milkweed is very easy to grow from seed. It doesn't need any special treatment, and you can use the paper towel and plastic bag method that I showed you and grow up a mess of narrow-leaf milkweed. The showy milkweed doesn't start as easily and needs what we call cold, moist stratification to grow well. And that means you put them in a plastic baggie with a moist sand and put them in your refrigerator about 6 weeks, and then sprout them just the way you narrow-leaf milkweed, and they'll grow fine. But they have to have that cold, moist treatment to break what we call secondary dormancy and get the message that it's time to grow. This is the tropical milkweed that you want to avoid. It's very pretty. We've all seen it. Most of us have probably grown it. But at this point, my recommendation is tear it out, get rid of it. Don't grow it at all. If you must grow it, be sure to cut it down by the end of September, right to the ground, so that it is gone and the parasites are gone with it. And then they have to build up for the next year from scratch, just as they do on the native milkweed. There's also a pure yellow form of this. It looks this color, but it doesn't have the reddish orange petals that this one has. So no tropical, yes, native. And this is the showy milkweed. These seeds are readily available. It has a really interesting flower and becomes a big plant. It'll get up 4 or 5 feet and has big fuzzy leaves that are really attractive. And the monarchs will chow down on it. I had a big one that got eaten practically just down to the stems and had about 35 caterpillars on it doing the work, and they really went to town on it. So again, cold moist stratification for this one. Okay, well, where are we? We want to support a healthy ecosystem. We want to increase biodiversity. We may get better results by starting seeds in pots because we can protect them. We can protect them from birds eating them. We can protect them from mammals eating them when they're tiny, and at least get them going enough that they might do fine. Now, you could start the seeds if you're going to grow them in a protected spot, on a deck, on a fenced area, plant them right in the ground, or plant them right in larger pots. We went through the paper towel method, the peat pots, the coir pots, the cow pots, and I say any pot you can find is dandy. Use your observation skills, your patience, get library books. There are lots of resources out there that are wonderful, and ask questions, including tonight, and join the Homegrown National Park and help us increase the habitat for our native bees, our insects, and our birds. And I thank you for allowing me this opportunity to share these ideas with you. And Jen,
Thank
if
you
you
so
have
much.
questions, let's go for it.
Okay, yeah, that was a lot of really amazing information. I've learned from you actually talking. I think I've dumped so many seeds out in my, like pounds of seeds out in my garden every year, because I have this vision of this just like wildflower burst of just eruption. And I've been disappointed, and I think a lot of it is due to birds eating the seeds. And so I'm gonna, based on your techniques and advice, I'm gonna try to do them in pots this year and just see how that goes. And I'm really excited to try that.
Yeah.
So we do have some questions with the when you showed the bean example. Can you also do that with pinto? Do you have to soak the pinto first?
No,
No.
you don't have to. You will get a little quicker sprouting if you soak the beans overnight. And this goes for, I would say, 90% of vegetable seeds, by the way. Soaking them overnight is a good technique. It gives them a head start. I have some guajillo peppers on my refrigerator right now, which I got out of peppers and soaked overnight, and they seem to be sprouting. So it's been about 4 or 5 days, and they're starting to sprout. So soaking is always a good idea, but it's not absolutely necessary.
Okay. Once you transplant to the cork or manure pots, do you keep the seedlings outside or inside?
Yeah, by that time when I first transplanted those seedlings from the peat pot to the coir pot, I kept them inside just a day or two, but most indoor spots really aren't bright enough to get good compact plants growing. You see very quickly that they're starting to elongate, and they're kind of skinny, and that's not what we want. We want kind of fat, compact plants, and it takes quite a bit of light to get that. So move them outside as soon as you can to a spot that doesn't have more than a couple hours of morning sun, because you don't want to fry them. When they start indoors, their cells aren't as thick as they need to be to ward off that all that energy coming in from the sun. So you have to ease them to the outdoors, but do it as soon as is feasible, and they'll be a much healthier and more compact plant, and you won't get these skinny, we call it etiolated. When the stem grows really long, it's basically looking for more, trying to get the leaves closer to the light. If you have a good grow light, you might be able to use that for a longer time. But even then, you're going to want to get them outside as soon as you can.
And then when you do get them outside, are you watering them every day, or putting water like in a tray underneath them every day, or is it kind of every other day about, or?
Well, okay, we're talking about California natives here, so we're not sprouting them in the middle of the summer. That is not their time to grow. They're too smart to have evolved to do that. So the ones in the pictures were started in November. So obviously it's fall. It may not have actually been raining, but it wasn't very hot. And I would say they needed a little bit of water about every third day, possibly, but not more than that, especially because they weren't out in full sun. It depends on the wind. It depends on how warm the day is and the humidity. But those little pots will hold some water for a period of time. And you can't really overwater them if you do it from the bottom and let them soak up the water and then get rid of the excess. You can't overwater them. And a good potting soil will hold some moisture, but have a lot of air in there as well, which is healthy for the roots. So it's really pretty easy to keep the right moisture level. I would not suggest that you get a handful of soil from your garden and stick it in a pot and try to start the plants in that, even though obviously they grow out in a heavy soil in nature. Probably only one in many thousand seeds actually get started out there. And you want better success than that. So you don't want a mud pie in your pot. You don't want heavy clay. And frankly, you don't want all of the funguses and bacteria that are in your soil, which ultimately are probably really good for the plant, but not necessarily when it's just sprouting and can succumb to fungal attacks really easily.
So, but is it too late to start them now? We can still start the seeds now.
No.
Yeah.
They keep sprouting out in the world from the time of the first rain, which in this case was November, I think, or maybe the end of October, right through the spring rains. And this is a wonderful time, between rainstorms to get going. If you want to do a little patch outside, this is the time to do it. We're now, what are we, 2 weeks away from the heavy rains that we had? So the soil's drying out a little bit. You can scratch it up and put some seeds in there and pat it down and get some going right now. And they will really be happy for that. And I'll probably add some seeds to those next to those little patches that I took the pictures of, just because this is such a perfect time to do it. And you can keep going into March anyway. After that, the irony of the California poppy is that, of course, it really is heavily in bloom toward the end of winter and into spring. And people come into the nurseries and say, oh, there's all these poppies out there and I want to grow some. And sure, we have some growing in pots at that point, but they're not going to last very long because the soil is going to get too dry for them. And even if you water them, they know what's going on and they know they're not going to last. So they'll give you some flowers, but you'll be much happier getting them into the ground by seed or by starting them and then planting them during the cool season, during the rainy season. And then you'll have California poppies when the rest of them are blooming out on the hillsides. But once you see that heavy bloom out there, don't buy the plants anymore because they're not going to do well. That's my nurseryman's tip for the day.
So if we start the seeds, we can still transplant them up through February, basically, is what you're saying. Yeah.
No, well into March.
Into March. Okay.
Well into
so that.
March. Yeah, absolutely. And the soils around here hold on to the moisture for a long time. And it's if you haven't destroyed your soil texture, the soil draws the moisture up from way down below. And of course, the roots are growing down and they will find moisture, and at least through June. And then everybody starts around here, everybody meaning the plants, start to harden themselves off for the long, dry summer and fall, which can last from the end of June through at least October before we get reliable rains again. So these plants have had to adapt to this dry summer climate that we have, and they've done it very well. But there's no point in fighting that and trying to grow these plants to give you a big show during the, July and August. They're just not built to do that.
There's a couple questions on the crowding, because when you do the mix, there's a lot in a small space. So do you ever feel like you need to pull them apart and spread them out, or you just kind of let them work it out on their own?
I let them fight it out.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do that. However, once they get going, I find it's best to just let those roots grow and disturb them as little as possible. Every time you try to separate plants from each other, they're all tangled up, you're breaking roots, and then they have to kind of start over again. And you would be, if you want to thin them, you'd be best off snipping them off at ground level with a little tiny pair of scissors to separate them out, and not try to get every one of them to grow. But I find that they really do pretty well. Some will shade others out and they'll be dominant. And then if you have a spot that's a little less shady, other plants will probably be dominant, and they'll work it out. Yeah. And they bloom at different times. So
Yeah,
you can get a longer show by having them, let the ranunculus bloom first, and then eventually you're going to get through the others to the Clarkias. Yeah.
Does milkweed need full sun?
It's best in full sun. It will grow in, and full sun means basically sun from about 10 in the morning till about 4 in the afternoon. That's when the sun is strongest. You can't really substitute 2 hours from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for any of that period. So that's full sun. If you've got less than full sun, it means you've got less than that 6 hours during that period. And probably with 4 hours, the milkweed will do fine. It won't grow as big. It won't bloom quite as prolifically, but it'll make enough leaves to feed some butterflies. So that'll work. The narrow leaf milkweed is probably a little bit more adaptable than the showy milkweed.
Once we this is the last question, because there's a lot. I'm really glad people are super interested in this, and I am so excited myself. I'm going to do my seeds this weekend. So once so we might get like a couple more rains.
Yeah.
And say we start the seeds this weekend and they're sprouting, and we transplant them into the ground by the end of February or mid-March or whatnot, and the rains have pretty much stopped at that point. How often are we watering them at that point? I mean, is it a couple times a week, or what do you recommend?
It shouldn't have to be that often yet. March is still the sun is not very high. We're just at the equinox in March, and we don't usually get very many hot days in March. What you need to do is, if we're talking about plants in the ground, you need to go out to your patch of ground and stick your finger in it and see if it's moist, basically. If it's dry as a bone down the length of your finger, then it's time to water. But I think in March, you're still going to find that the soil is moist after you get down an inch or so. But that'll depend a little bit on how much more rain we get and when we get it. In containers, you need to water more regularly. And again, use your finger, stick it in the soil in the pot and see if it's moist. If it's not, then give it a good soaking. The plants that I took the pictures of that are in the large terracotta pot, I don't think have been watered with a hose since December because of all the rain that we got. But we're going to have to keep an eye on it now. If supposedly we're going to get a little rain this weekend, but if it's not substantial, you know, an eighth of an inch of rain does not soak in very much, and it doesn't get a pot very wet either because a lot of it spills out. So use your common sense, use your finger. You should never have to water every day, almost anything. Most plants like to get somewhat dry between waterings. And keep in mind that the further down in the pot you go, the wetter it is. And if you keep it constantly soggy, it'll be so wet in the bottom third of the pot that the roots will never be able to grow down there. The roots need oxygen to grow. And if there's just water there, basically, the roots can't grow. And so you're reducing the size of your pot by a third by keeping it so wet. Thorough watering when you water, and then allow it to get somewhat dry before you water again. Most plants will tell you when they're getting dry, they'll get wilty, and then they'll perk right up when you water them. But never every day, and every other day, probably only in the summer.
Great. I just want to share one more thing because I don't want people to get disappointed when on your seed journey, because I've been disappointed. And I consulted with Dan on this because I think it was last year I did the seed balls. So Sloat sells seed balls, and it's just literally, it's like a clay packed thing full of seeds. And I put them all out again, having this vision of this like burst of just eruption of flowers in my garden. And I think the squirrels came and put them all like in their little paws and brought them somewhere. I don't know. None of them bloom. So what I'm doing this year, based on Dan's advice, is I'm starting them all in containers with potting soil and just setting them on top of in the container in the potting soil, which he's done before. And so just a note, if you're going to try that, you might want to maybe do half in the ground and half in containers just to cover it. But anyway, this is super inspiring. I'm really excited. Like I said, I'm going to start my seeds this weekend. And I thank you for your time and your expertise as always. And thanks everyone for joining us on this Wednesday evening. We're at about an hour now, so it's perfect time to shut down and make dinner and just close out the day. So I hope everybody has a good day. I hope to see you at more classes in the future, and have a good night. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.